Get those dirty hands behind your back. That is what Professor Alden screamed, loud, public, before 300 elite PhDs. The janitor didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He simply looked past Alden, calm, still, unreadable. Officer Davis grabbed his arm. The crowd recorded. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The janitor looked up at the chalkboard, his eyes locked onto the equation. One variable. Impossible. Wrong. He had known it for 48 hours. He had memorized it in silence on his knees while cleaning Alden's floor. He reached into his coveralls with one hand, a platinum badge flat and cold. He set it on the podium face up. The room went very quiet. 300 people read the title beneath his name and...
Wrong move. He just arrested the genius evaluating his stolen research. Let me take you back.
The hall was cold. The lights hummed. Marcus moved through the back of the lecture hall without a sound. His broom cut slow, steady arcs across the pale linoleum floor. He worked the way he always worked, with quiet precision, with total patience, with the kind of invisible discipline that no one in this building ever thought to notice. The graduate students sat in tightly packed rows. Their pens moved. Their heads stayed bowed over notebooks filled with careful, dutiful, borrowed thinking. None of them looked back. None of them ever did. At the front of the room, Professor Alden paced. His shoes were expensive. They were Italian leather, hand-stitched, and perfectly polished. Every step rang out across the floor with a sharp, deliberate clack, clack, clack that silenced everything else. He wore a $3,000 suit. It was charcoal gray, finely tailored, and completely immaculate. His titanium tablet glowed on the podium. Its screen was crisp. Its surface caught the light like something designed to be admired. He held it the way powerful men hold things, carelessly with one hand, as though its value meant nothing. "Miss Chen," he said. His voice was flat. It carried no warmth, no hesitation, no mercy. "Stand up." Sarah stood. She was thin. She looked tired. Her dark eyes were ringed with the particular exhaustion of someone who had not slept in weeks. Her blazer was clean but worn at the cuffs. Her notebook was open. Her pen was still in her hand. "Tell me," Professor Alden said, "what the core topological assertion in this morning's chapter actually means. In your own words." He paused. He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "If you have any." The room went still. 20 graduate students stared forward. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was cruel, careful, and completely intentional. It was the kind of silence that a man like Alden had spent years learning to weaponize. Sarah's mouth opened. "The assertion identifies a non-orientable surface," she said, "whose boundary conditions can be used to model dimensional folding in quantum scale systems. The key variable," she continued, her voice firm, "is the loop's self-intersection parameter which I've been developing since, which you have been developing," Professor Alden said, cutting her off with a slow, patient smile, "under my direct supervision, using the theoretical framework I established within the department I built. So let's be precise about whose work this actually is." He turned back to the class. He tapped his tablet once. The theorem appeared on the large screen behind him, clean and formatted with his name printed in bold at the top. Sarah's name appeared nowhere. It did not appear in the footnotes. It did not appear in the acknowledgments. It did not exist. "This theorem," he said, spreading one hand toward the screen in a broad, proprietary gesture, "represents the most significant topological breakthrough in the last 2 decades. And it will be presented at the Grand Symposium this Friday under the banner of this department." Sarah sat back down. She said nothing. Her pen touched the edge of her notebook. Her jaw was tight. Her expression was still. Her hands were flat against the desk, steady and composed. In the back of the room, Marcus paused his sweeping. He did not pause because he was tired. He did not pause because he was distracted. He paused because something on the board had caught his attention. It caught him the way a wrong note catches the ear of a musician who cannot ignore it. He looked at the theorem. He looked at the variable cluster in the third line. His eyes moved slowly across the sequence. They were careful. They were methodical. They were completely silent, the way eyes move when the mind behind them is doing something significant. The broom handle was rough in his hands. It was old wood, dry and splintered at the grip. His coveralls smelled faintly of stale bleach. The fabric was faded to a pale, washed-out blue. The knees were stained with the particular gray of floor grime that never entirely lifted. He was by every visible measure exactly what Professor Alden believed him to be. A man without complexity, without depth, without anything worth noticing. Marcus looked back at the board. His lips did not move. His expression did not change. But something shifted behind his eyes, quiet and precise and entirely private, like a door opening in a room no one else knew existed. He began sweeping again. The class continued. Professor Alden moved through the material with practiced authority, annotating, gesturing, fielding only the questions he chose to acknowledge. He dismissed the rest with a brevity so sharp it functioned as punishment. Sarah did not raise her hand again. She sat with her pen moving steadily. She transcribed everything onto paper that was already hers. She listened to a man repeat her own ideas back to a room full of people who had no reason to doubt him. By the time the lecture ended, the hall was emptying. Students gathered their bags. They filed out in clusters. Professor Alden descended from the platform. He was surrounded immediately by two colleagues who laughed at something he said and nodded with the practiced enthusiasm of people who understood power. He did not look back at Sarah. She was already invisible to him. Marcus worked his way to the far window. The glass was cold to the touch. It was fogged slightly at the lower corners where the heating system fought the November air outside. He set his broom down. His index finger moved to the condensation on the pane. He began to trace. The line curved inward on itself. It looped. It doubled back. It connected without ever crossing, forming a surface with exactly one side and no true boundary. A Mobius strip rendered in fog, precise and effortless, and gone the moment the glass warmed. He stood looking at it for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his broom. He moved on. Professor Alden had no idea that the silent man emptying his trash was the only person on Earth capable of exposing his academic fraud. But tonight, in the basement supply closet, Marcus would open his locker. He would reach past the extra mop heads and the spare bottles of floor cleaner. His fingers would close around something small, cold, and entirely out of place in that gray fluorescent space. A solid gold encrypted flash drive, its surface, unmarked its contents, known to almost no one alive. He pocketed it without hurry. He closed the locker. He went back to work. The office was dark when Marcus arrived. He did not knock. Custodians never knocked. He pushed the door open with his shoulder the way he always did and dragged the mop bucket in behind him. The wheels squeaked against the marble floor. The sound was small and embarrassing and entirely his. He did not mind it. He had learned long ago not to mind things like that. Professor Alden's office was large. It was the kind of large that announced itself. The ceiling was high. The shelves were floor-to-ceiling mahogany lined with books that looked red but probably were not. A solid gold Mont Blanc pen rested in a crystal stand on the corner of the desk. The desk itself was the size of a dining table, dark and polished and completely clear except for one thing. A laptop, open, glowing. Marcus moved to the far corner and began mopping. He worked in slow, overlapping arcs the same way he always worked, methodical and quiet and invisible. The room smelled of old paper, expensive cologne, and the faint, lingering bitterness of espresso. A bone china cup sat on a silver tray near the window. The espresso inside it was still warm. The professor had not been gone long. Marcus did not look at the laptop. He mopped the corner. He moved to the next section. He kept his eyes low, his pace steady, his expression neutral. But the glow from the screen was persistent. It reached across the desk, across the dark floor, and found the edge of his peripheral vision. He did not look at it. Then he saw the name. It was at the top of the document. Small font. Academic formatting. The author field read Alden R.P., but below it in the body of the abstract, the language was unmistakable, specific, precise, alive with a particular quality of thinking that Marcus had heard only once before that afternoon in the lecture hall, in the voice of a tired young woman who had not slept in weeks. He stopped mopping. The document was Sarah's theorem. All of it. Her variable structure, her boundary condition notation, her dimensional folding framework. Every line was hers. Every idea was hers, and every byline was his. Marcus stood in the quiet office, the mop handle still in his hand, and read. He read slowly, he read carefully, he read the way he did everything, with complete attention, with zero wasted motion, with the kind of focused stillness that looked from the outside like a man doing nothing at all. Near the bottom of the third page, he found it, a variable error. It was small. It was subtle. It was the kind of mistake that a brilliant student might never catch, because it lived in a register of mathematics that very few people on Earth had reason to visit. But Marcus visited it. He had lived in it for 20 years. He recognized the error the way a surgeon recognizes a misplaced suture, instantly, completely, with the calm certainty of someone who has seen exactly this kind of damage before and knows precisely what it costs. He did not write anything down. He did not need to. He looked at the variable once more, memorized its position, its form, its exact relationship to the surrounding structure, and then he filed it away in the same place he filed everything, deep organized and permanently accessible. The door opened. Professor Alden stepped in. He was still in his suit jacket, silk tie loosened by 1 inch, the expression on his face the expression of a man who owned every room he entered and knew it. He stopped when he saw Marcus. His eyes moved from Marcus to the laptop, then back to Marcus. "What are you doing?" he said. "Mopping, sir," Marcus said. Professor Alden walked to the desk. He did not close the laptop. He sat down, pulled the bone china cup toward him, and looked at Marcus with the slow, deliberate attention of a man deciding how seriously to take a minor irritation. "You're in the wrong corner," he said. "I'll finish the window side next," Marcus said. Professor Alden looked at him for another moment. Then he reached for the espresso cup, tilted it deliberately, and let the contents spill across the desk. The liquid spread fast, dark and scalding, running off the edge of the desk in a thin, steady stream and soaking directly into the knees of Marcus's uniform pants. The heat was immediate. It was sharp. It bit through the thin fabric and pressed against his skin with a focused, searing intensity that made every nerve in the affected area fire at once. Marcus did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look up. "Clean that up," Professor Alden said. Marcus set the mop aside. He reached into his cart and pulled out a stack of cheap paper towels, rough single-ply, the kind that abraded more than they absorbed. He crouched down. He pressed the towels against the wet floor and began to work. Professor Alden watched him. He said nothing. He simply watched with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just confirmed something he already believed about the order of things in his world. Marcus pressed the paper towels into the floor, patient and steady and completely contained. The espresso was still hot. The paper towels were already disintegrating under the moisture. His knees ached from the crouching. His skin beneath the soaked fabric of the uniform stung with a persistent, focused burn. He filed that away too. When he finished, he stood. He gathered the wet towels. He dropped them in the waste bin on his cart. He picked up his mop. He moved to the window side of the room and continued working exactly as he had said he would. Professor Alden turned back to his laptop. He began typing. The gold pen caught the lamplight as his sleeve moved across the desk. He did not look up again. He thought he was destroying a janitor's pride. He was not. He was handing a loaded weapon to his own executioner, and the anonymous peer reviewer he kept bragging about bribing, the one whose name he never spoke aloud, whose opinion he believed he had purchased and controlled. was someone the professor had never once considered looking for in the maintenance wing of his own building. Morning came early to the symposium building. The corridors were still dim, still cold, still holding the particular silence of a place not yet inhabited. Marcus arrived before anyone else. He always did. He liked the building before it became itself, before the voices and the shoes and the performance of importance filled every hallway and pushed the quiet out entirely. He found a corner near the end of the east corridor behind a maintenance cart and a stack of folded tarps. It was not a comfortable place. The floor was hard. The light above it flickered slightly. But it was hidden, and it was his. And for 40 minutes every morning, it was where he did the only thing he did entirely for himself. He opened the notebook. It was a leather-bound journal, hand-stitched at the spine, the kind of object that takes on the quality of its owner over time. The cover was worn smooth at the corners. The pages were thick and cream-colored and filled from margin to margin with mathematics. Not the tidy, formatted mathematics of published papers. Something else entirely. Something alive, corrective-reaching. Fractal topology corrections that moved across the page in dense, confident clusters, annotated in a hand so precise it looked almost typeset. Marcus uncapped his pen. He turned to the current page. He began to write. The work was an extension of what he had seen on the laptop 2 nights before. He was not correcting Sarah's theorem, he was completing it. He was taking the structure she had built, the beautiful, legitimate stolen structure, and extending it into a register she had not yet reached. A dimensional folding model, so precise, so internally consistent, so mathematically airtight, that it would make the flawed version on Alden's screen look like a rough sketch. He wrote for 35 minutes. He did not stop. He did not look up. He did not hear the footsteps. What is that? The voice was not a question. It landed in the corridor like something dropped from a height, flat and heavy and designed to hurt. Marcus looked up. Professor Alden stood at the end of the corridor, still in his overcoat, his briefcase in one hand and his titanium tablet in the other. His eyes were on the notebook. His expression was suspicious, furious, and entirely calculating. Marcus closed the notebook. He said nothing. Professor Alden walked toward him. His leather shoes struck the floor in that familiar, deliberate rhythm, clack, 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 each step measured. Each step a statement. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked down at Marcus with the expression of a man who has decided in advance what he is going to find. "A janitor," he said, "sitting on my floor, writing." He let that sit for a moment. "Writing what exactly?" "Personal notes," Marcus said. "Personal notes," Professor Alden repeated. He said it the way one repeats something absurd. He held out his hand. "Give it to me." Marcus looked at the hand. He looked at the notebook in his own. He said nothing. "Now," Professor Alden said. Marcus gave him the notebook. The professor took it. He opened it. He looked at the first page with an expression that shifted fast and uncontrolled through several things at once: confusion, recognition, fury, and something else, something colder, something that settled into his eyes like a decision being made. He turned 2 more pages. Then he closed the notebook. He tore it open at the spine. The sound was visceral. It was sickening. In the dead silence of the empty corridor, the tearing of thick, expensive paper was loud and final and completely obscene. The sound of something that had no defense being destroyed by something that had no reason. Page after page came free. They came apart in thick, cream-colored sheets, dense with mathematics, years of work, in some cases, corrections and extensions, and ideas that had nowhere else to exist. Marcus sat completely still. His face did not move. His hands resting on his knees did not clench. But something behind his eyes went very, very quiet. The particular quiet of a person absorbing something that cannot be responded to and cannot be forgiven. Professor Alden crossed to the yellow plastic mop bucket sitting beside Marcus's cart. He held the torn pages over it. He looked at Marcus once directly with full and conscious intention. Then he released them. The pages hit the gray water slowly. They separated on impact. The thick cream paper darkened immediately, absorbing the toxic bleach-heavy sludge, the corners curling, the dense lines of mathematics blurring and spreading and dissolving into the murk. Gone. All of it. Every correction, every extension, every proof. Ruined. Professor Alden dropped the empty spine of the notebook in after them. He straightened his overcoat. He picked up his briefcase and his tablet. He looked at Marcus one final time with the calm, satisfied expression of a man who has just reasserted the correct order of things. "Clean that up," he said, "and stay out of the corridors where you don't belong." He walked away. His shoes struck the floor. Clack, clack, clack. The sound faded down the corridor and disappeared. Marcus did not move for a long moment. He looked at the mop bucket. He looked at the ruined pages floating in the gray water, the cream color gone, the ink blooming outward in dark dissolving clouds. He thought he was drowning a janitor's worthless scribbles. He was not. He was drowning his own empire. What the professor did not know, what he could not have known because he had never once looked closely enough to see anything real in the man who emptied his trash, was that those torn pages contained the only complete mathematical proof capable of keeping him out of federal prison. And he had just destroyed it with his own hands. Behind a pillar at the far end of the corridor, a pair of wide, frightened eyes watched everything. Sarah had arrived early too. She had seen all of it. She had not made a sound.
Absolutely not. He actually tore up a man's private journal and threw it in dirty mop water just to prove a point. If that were me, I would have lost my mind right there in the hallway. Imagine standing in wet coveralls while some arrogant bully destroys your personal property for his own entertainment. The audacity is real.
By 10 o'clock, the grand symposium hall was full. 300 people filled the tiered seats in a dense, rustling mass of tailored jackets, silk scarves, and polished credentials. They were academics and donors, department heads and board members. They were the kind of assembled authority that fills a room with its own particular gravity. The air smelled of old wood and fresh coffee and the faint, expensive scent of collective self-importance. Every seat was taken. Every aisle was lined. At the front of the hall, the mahogany podium stood on a raised marble stage. Behind it, the massive chalkboard stretched from floor to ceiling, clean and dark and waiting. Professor Alden had insisted on the chalkboard. He always did. He said it was tradition. What he meant was that it was theater. He was very good at theater. He arrived at the podium to applause. It was warm, practiced, automatic. The applause of people who understood that their presence here was connected to his continued goodwill. He adjusted his silk tie. He opened his folder. He smiled with the ease of a man who has never once doubted his right to be at the center of any room he entered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily to the back of the hall, "what I am about to present represents a decade of sustained original inquiry into the mathematics of dimensional folding. This theorem," he continued, placing one hand flat on the podium, "will redefine the boundary between theoretical topology and applied quantum modeling." In the front row, Sarah sat with her hands folded in her lap. Her face was composed. Her spine was straight. Only her knuckles, pressed white against each other, told the truth of what it cost her to sit in that seat and listen to those words in that voice. Marcus was near the back. He stood beside the double doors, a mop handle in one hand and a maintenance clipboard in the other. He was visible to no one in the way that maintenance workers are visible to no one, present, necessary, and entirely beneath notice. He watched the chalkboard. He watched the equation building line by line as Professor Alden wrote, copying from his notes with the practiced confidence of a man who has rehearsed this performance many times. Marcus saw the error go up in the third line. He watched it settle into the equation. It looked clean. It looked authoritative. It was completely wrong. His jaw tightened once. Then it relaxed. Professor Alden continued. His voice moved through the hall in smooth, unhurried waves. The donors leaned forward. The academics nodded. Cell phones appeared and disappeared as people photographed slides. Everything in the room confirmed what the room had already decided before arriving, that the man at the podium was brilliant, credentialed, and correct. Then Professor Alden looked up. His eyes moved across the back of the hall in the automatic possessive way of a man surveying his own territory. They crossed the rows of seated guests. They crossed the aisles. They reached the double doors. They found Marcus. The professor's expression did not change immediately. It shifted slowly. It moved the way a temperature shifts, through something private and cold before it surfaced as anger. He straightened at the podium. He stopped speaking. The silence spread through the hall in a ripple, confused and immediate. "Officer Davis," Professor Alden said. Officer Davis was near the side wall. He was broad alert and accustomed to responding to that voice quickly. He straightened. He looked at the professor. "Remove that man," Professor Alden said. He pointed directly at Marcus. "He is trespassing on a restricted academic event. Detain him for corporate espionage and unauthorized access." The hall erupted. It was not a loud eruption. It was the eruption of 300 people drawing breath at the same instant, a collective echoing gasp that filled the domed ceiling and bounced back down in fragments. Then the phones came up. They rose in a single synchronized motion, red recording lights blinking on in a wave, small and relentless and digital, like a swarm of predators that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Officer Davis moved fast. He was not a man who hesitated. He crossed the hall with the focused, heavy stride of someone who had been told what to do and intended to do it. His hand was already moving to the cuffs at his belt. Marcus stood still. He did not back toward the door. He did not raise his hands. He stood watching Officer Davis approach with the particular stillness of someone who is not afraid and is not pretending not to be afraid. He took one step. He took it sideways toward the chalkboard, not away from it, quiet and deliberate and unhurried. One step was all he needed. Officer Davis caught him before he could take another. The cuffs came off the belt with a cold metallic unspooling sound. Officer Davis wrenched Marcus's arms back. The steel bit into his wrists. It was cold. It was unyielding and heavy. Marcus went still again. He did not resist. He did not speak. At the podium, Professor Alden adjusted his silk tie. He looked out over the hall with an expression of settled, absolute authority. It was the expression of a man who has just reasserted the correct order of things in front of 300 witnesses. He was in this moment completely sure of himself, completely certain, completely in control. In the front row, Sarah pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were wide and bright and devastated. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the chalkboard. She looked at the error in the third line of the equation. The error she recognized because it was her theorem, and she knew every line of it. Her face went through something complex and private and terrible. Marcus lifted his eyes. He looked past Officer Davis. He looked past Professor Alden. He looked at the chalkboard, at the error, at the exact variable he had memorized in the dark of the professor's office 2 nights ago, resting there in plain sight on a massive board in front of 300 people with recording devices. Professor Alden wanted a public execution to assert his absolute dominance. He had built the stage himself. He had positioned the audience himself. He had lit the lights himself. He did not realize yet that he had also built the gallows. "You have absolutely no idea," Marcus said quietly enough that only Officer Davis heard it. "What you just did. If you want to see how this ends, you know what to do." Now back to Marcus' stoic expression. The marble was cold against Marcus's knees. Officer Davis had not been gentle about it. He had come down hard and fast, one hand on Marcus's shoulder, one on his wrist. He drove him to the floor with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times and felt nothing about it. The handcuffs were tight. They bit into the thin, frayed cuffs of Marcus's uniform with a pressure that was specific, deliberate, and entirely designed to communicate a single message about where he stood in this room. He knelt on the marble and said nothing. The hall had not gone quiet. It had gone into a different kind of noise. The low, urgent murmur of 300 people processing something they had not expected to see. Phones were still recording. People in the front rows had turned fully in their seats. Two academics near the center aisle were speaking rapidly, quietly, and privately to each other. None of them moved to help. That was not the kind of room that moved to help. Officer Davis pressed his knee into the center of Marcus's spine. The pressure was sharp, it was focused, it was deliberate. It was deeply humiliating, the kind of physical statement that says without words that the person applying it has decided you are something less than what he is. Marcus absorbed it. He held his body still. He kept his breathing slow, even, and controlled. Above him, Professor Alden stepped away from the podium. He walked to the edge of the stage. He looked down at Marcus with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who has just watched something inevitable conclude. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loud enough for the entire hall, "I apologize for this disruption. Campus security will handle the situation. We will continue." Scattered uncertain applause. A few people, then more. Then most of the room, because most of the room had decided in the way that rooms like this always decide that the man at the podium knew what was true and what was not. In the front row, Sarah did not applaud. She sat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs. She watched Marcus on the floor. Her face was doing something complicated and silent. It was the face of someone who knows that what they are seeing is wrong and understands completely that there is nothing they can do about it. She was a graduate student. He was, as far as anyone in this room knew, a janitor. Neither of them had any power here. Officer Davis adjusted the cuffs. The steel pulled tighter. Marcus felt the cold edge of it against his wrist bones. It was thin, precise, and mean. He looked down at the marble floor. It was polished to a mirror finish. He could see himself in it, distorted and small, a man in faded, bleach-stained coveralls kneeling on the floor of a hall, built to celebrate the achievements of people who would never kneel on anything. The weight pressed down on him. It was not just physical. It was the accumulated weight of every corridor he had mopped, every room he had emptied, every conversation he had been invisible inside. It pressed down with a specific, comprehensive force that had nothing to do with Officer Davis's knee and everything to do with the 30 years of decisions that had brought him to this floor, in this uniform, in this moment. He thought about the notebook. He thought about the pages in the mop bucket. He thought about Sarah's face in the lecture hall, the error on the laptop, and the gold flash drive in his locker. He thought about all of it, patient and methodical and still, while the marble pressed into his knees and the steel bit into his wrists. Then Officer Davis forced his head up. It was not gentle. It was a hand under the jaw, tilting his face toward the stage the way you'd angle a camera. Marcus did not resist it. His head came up. His eyes found the room, the tears of seated people, the phones, the podium. And then the chalkboard. It was right there. Enormous, unavoidable. The equation filled the upper half of it, Professor Alden's borrowed broken mathematics written in clean white chalk line after line, building toward a conclusion that was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. Marcus looked at it. He looked at the third line, at the variable, at the exact error he had memorized in the dark office 2 nights ago and filed away in the part of his mind that never lost anything. Something shifted. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It was quiet, internal, and very fast, the way a key turning in a lock is quiet. The shape he had traced on the fogged window that first morning, the Mobius strip, the surface that loops back on itself, aligned in his mind with the variable error on the board. Perfectly, completely. The way two pieces align when they were always the same piece. He saw The proof. The whole proof. Correct, complete, and irrefutable. The equation on the board was not just flawed, but stolen. The person it was stolen from was sitting 12 rows behind him right now, her hands pressed flat against her thighs. Marcus looked at the error on the board. He looked at it with the specific, contained attention of a man who has just understood something that changes everything. He was handcuffed, he was on a marble floor, he was in front of 300 people. None of that changed what he saw. The trap had sprung shut. That part was done. Solid. Sealed. But the thing sleeping inside the man the trap had caught was not asleep anymore. It was awake. It was patient. It was looking at the board. Professor Alden tapped the exact variable on the board with one confident finger. He pointed to it for the crowd. He explained it with the authority of a man who had spent years pretending to own something that was never his. He smiled. He was very pleased with himself. The variable he was pointing to was mathematically impossible. And Marcus, kneeling on the cold marble in frayed blue coveralls, was the only person in the room who knew exactly why. Wait. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It arrived in the hall the way a circuit breaker trips, sudden, complete, and followed immediately by a different kind of silence than the one before it. Marcus said it without raising his voice. He said it without turning his head. He said it to the room quietly and with absolute authority, and the room heard it. Officer Davis stopped. He stopped not because he had been ordered to stop, but because something in the quality of that single word made stopping the only available response. He looked down at Marcus. Marcus was already rising. He did not ask permission. He did not wait. He simply rose from the floor the way water rises, without effort, without hurry, without any visible expenditure of force. He was unhurried. He was certain. The handcuffs were still on his wrists. He did not seem to notice them. Officer Davis reached out. His hand closed on Marcus's arm. Marcus looked at the hand. He looked at it with a calm so specific and so total that Officer Davis's grip loosened before he had decided to loosen it. Marcus stepped forward. Officer Davis stepped back. It happened in less than 2 seconds. Neither of them spoke during it. The hall was very quiet. Professor Alden stood at the podium. His face had moved through several things in the last 4 seconds. Confusion, irritation, the beginning of a new command. He opened his mouth. Marcus walked to the chalkboard. He moved with surgical precision, unhurried and direct. He crossed the stage in 12 steps that each landed with the quiet, deliberate weight of someone who has decided exactly where he is going and has no interest in being redirected. He reached the board. He stood in front of it. He looked at the equation for 1 full second, calm and comprehensive, and entirely without performance. Then he picked up the chalk. It was a short piece, white, slightly worn at one end. He held it the way a person holds something they have held 10,000 times before. Lightly, with total control, the grip of someone for whom the instrument is simply an extension of thought. He raised it to the board. Professor Alden's voice came back. "Stop him! Stop that man right now!" Marcus crossed out the third line. The chalk moved fast. It was not violent, it was precise, a single diagonal strike through the variable. Cluster clean and final the way a surgeon makes the first incision. No hesitation, no excess, complete commitment. The white dust fell in a thin rain onto his blue coveralls. It settled into the fabric bright against the faded color. Then he began to write. What happened in the next 10 seconds was difficult for most of the 300 people in the hall to process in real time. They saw a man in a janitor's uniform writing on a chalkboard. They heard chalk against slate, fast, rhythmic, accelerating. A machine gun tapping that built in tempo until it sounded like a racing heartbeat amplified in the dome of the hall. They saw line after line appear dense and confident and structurally unlike anything Professor Alden had written, different in the way that a living thing is different from a copy of a living thing. Marcus wrote the correction. He wrote the extension. He wrote the proof. 10 seconds. Then he stopped. The chalk came down. The hall was silent. Completely, absolutely, finally silent. The silence of 300. People looking at something they do not fully understand but recognize at some fundamental level as true. Professor Alden looked at the board. His face had gone pale. It had gone pale in the specific way of a person who has just seen something they cannot explain away, cannot redirect, cannot perform their way out of. He looked at the variable Marcus had crossed out. He looked at what had replaced it. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus turned from the board. He reached into the inner pocket of his coveralls. He withdrew something small, heavy, and bright. A platinum card, thick as a coin, engraved on one side with a seal and on the other with text. He crossed to the podium. He set it down on the polished surface directly beside Professor Alden's gold Mont Blanc pen. The card read, Global Mathematics Consortium, Chairman, Dr. Marcus Vance. The hall read it, all of it. 300 phones were recording. 300 pairs of eyes were reading. The silence that followed was the specific ringing silence of an empire crumbling, which sounds, it turns out, exactly like nothing at all. Professor Alden looked at the card. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the board. He was for the first time in a very long career completely without a next move. That equation, Marcus said, his voice level and clear and carrying easily to every corner of the hall, contains a fundamental variable error in the third line. The error renders the entire theorem structurally invalid. The correct form, he continued, turning briefly toward the board, is now on the board. It has been there for approximately 45 seconds, and it is being recorded by every device in this room. He paused. He looked at Professor Alden. The theorem, as originally constructed, belongs to Sarah Chen. The variable notation, the boundary condition framework, and the dimensional folding model are all hers. The error in your version exists precisely because you did not understand what you were copying. In the front row, Sarah had gone very still. Her hands were no longer pressed against her thighs. They were in, her lap open, and her eyes were moving between the board and the card and Marcus's face with the expression of someone watching a locked door open from the inside. In the aisle, Officer Davis stood with his hand near his belt. His face was doing something uncertain, and lost the face of a man who has just understood that the person he arrested and the situation he was managing are not the things he was told they were. The silence in the auditorium was not just shock, it was the deafening sound of an academic empire crumbling into dust. Marcus reached into his coveralls again. This time he produced the flash drive. It was small silver and completely unremarkable to look at, the kind of object that could sit in a pocket for months without drawing attention. He held it between two fingers. He turned to the projection screen beside the chalkboard. He inserted it into the port on the lectern without asking permission and without looking at Professor Alden. The screen changed. What appeared was not dramatic in its presentation. It was a series of documents clean and dated and formatted with the particular precision of records created with the knowledge that they might one day need to be read in public. The first was an email chain. The names in it included Professor Alden, a journal editor, and a grants committee chair. The subject line read, Peer Review Arrangement. The dates ran back 14 months. The second document was a financial transfer record. It was detailed, itemized, and completely clear in what it showed. The third was a scanned copy of Sarah's original research submission, time-stamped 11 months ago, with her name at the top and her notation system intact throughout. Beneath it was Alden's symposium paper. His name was at the top. Her notation system was still intact throughout. The mathematics were identical, stolen, and now public. The hall read in silence, all 300 people. They read the emails, they read the transfer records, they read the side-by-side documents with two different names at the top and the same mathematics inside them. They read slowly. They read carefully. They read with a stillness that was not peace, but the absence of any remaining doubt. Professor Alden did not look at the screen. He looked at the flash drive. He looked at it the way a man looks at a locked door he thought he had sealed from the inside and as just discovered was never locked at all. "That is fabricated," he said. His voice was thin. It had lost its carrying quality entirely, as though the mechanism that had powered it for 30 years had simply switched off. "Those documents are fabricated, and I will have every person responsible for this prosecuted to the full." "The metadata on each file," Marcus said without raising his voice, "is independently verifiable. The email server logs are archived. The financial transfers are registered. The original submission timestamp is held by the journal's receiving system." He paused. He looked at Professor Alden with the level, unhurried attention of someone who prepared for this conversation a long time ago. "You are welcome to contest any of it." Professor Alden said nothing. He was visibly and completely a man, with nothing left to say. Officer Davis moved. He moved without being instructed, which was perhaps the most significant thing that happened in the hall that morning. He crossed the stage. He reached for the cuffs at his belt. He looked at Marcus, once ashamed and sweating, unable to hold eye contact for more than a second. Then he reached for Professor Alden's wrists. The professor pulled back. "Do not touch me. Do not you dare." "Sir," Officer Davis said. He said it quietly. He said it with the flat, exhausted certainty of a man who understands too late that he has been used. "Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked. The sound was heavy, final, and absolute. It filled the silence of the hall the way the first set of cuffs had not, because this one was heard by every person in the room and every recording device pointed at the stage. It was the sound of an ending, specific, clean, and irreversible. Professor Alden's Rolex caught the stage light as his arm was pulled back. It slid on his wrist. It spun once. It fell. It hit the marble stage with a sharp, bright crack and came to rest near the base of the podium, face up, still running, still keeping perfect time. A $3,000 instrument marking the seconds of its owner's complete and public ruin. The glowing platinum ID badge rested beside it on the floor, mockingly calm, utterly undisturbed. Marcus looked at it for one moment. Then he turned. Sarah was already standing. She had risen from her seat without anyone noticing the exact moment she did it. She was in the front row aisle. Her face was wet and bright and entirely transformed from the exhausted, compressed person who had sat there an hour ago. She was looking at the board, at the completed proof. Her proof. Finally correct. Finally whole. Finally public. Written in chalk on a chalkboard in front of 300 witnesses and every device in the room. Marcus stepped down from the stage. He walked to where she stood. He stopped in front of her. "The Consortium has a funded research position," he said. His voice had changed. It was still quiet and precise, but something in it was different now. Warmer human, the voice of a person speaking to another person, rather than to a room. "It has been open for 8 months. The selection committee reviewed your original submission before any of this." He paused. He looked at her directly. "We were waiting to see what you would do." Sarah looked at him. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Then she said, "You knew." "Not everything," Marcus said. "Enough." She looked at the board again. At her theorem, complete and correct and public and permanent. At the name that would now be attached to it in every recording, every report, every document that came out of this room today. Her name, only hers. Marcus picked up the chalk from the ledge. He turned it once in his fingers. He set it back down. He reached for the small cloth, hanging from the board's edge. He wiped the chalk dust from his hands slowly and completely, in the particular way of a person finishing a job they have been working toward for a long time. He walked off the stage. He did not look back. Professor Alden was being guided toward the side exit by Officer Davis, broken and begging and entirely alone. He did not look at the phones still recording. He did not look at the crowd, which had begun to murmur and shift with the energy of people who understand they have witnessed something that will be discussed for a very long time. He picked up his mop from where it leaned against the wall near the double doors. He looked once at the puddle of spilled mop water still sitting on the floor near the stage. Gray patient and undisturbed, waiting exactly where it had been left. He left it for the disgraced professor to clean. He walked out. The doors swung shut behind him, quiet and final, and the hall erupted into sound.
Fiction. But that feeling? It hits right in your core sense of justice. I'll admit, watching arrogant bullies get dismantled mathematically and completely ruined never gets old. What would you do if you held the secret to your abuser's downfall? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe.